amazing revelation has been discovered. But first, let us begin with the ancient Sumerian story. Enki, though brilliant, was a spoilt child, jealous of his brother-in-law, and wanting a kingdom of his own. When Nibiru was faced with the crisis of loss of atmosphere, the Anunnaki decided to mine gold on the earth to reseed their atmosphere. Enki saw it as an opportunity to grab power. He fomented a worker revolt, knowing that he could use Nibiru's emergency to force the council to accept anything. Enki wanted a world filled with slaves that he could rule over, which is something neither the council nor the Anunnaki would have ever allowed. But Enki was shrewd. He convinced the council that Nibiru would die if the gold-seeded atmospheric shield was delayed. He convinced them that the workers would not return to duty as they were following his orders, since he was in charge of the mining operation. He convinced the council that the only solution was to create a non-sentient species out of the highest order ape available to do the labor, but make them incapable of reproduction so they would naturally die off. The council saw no alternative, so they reluctantly and conditionally agreed, and they allowed Enki to carry out the plan. But Enki pulled a fast one and gave the new species the ability to breed, wanting a permanent stock of slaves for his planned kingdom. Enki went even further. He didn't just manipulate the ape's DNA, but he actually infused Anunnaki DNA into the mix. This would give him slaves that he would find attractive and acceptable to be in the company of. Enki did this both in the laboratory and also allowing his loyal striking workers to inseminate the females he created. This we find in Genesis 6, which led to the Nephilim. When Lord Anu and his son, Lord Enlil, learnt of this treachery, Enlil was sent to the earth to correct his brother's sin against the universe, as the Anunnaki have very strong moral code. Enlil took over on earth and brought Enki to justice, but it was too late. Enki had created several abominable and potentially dangerous seed lines, all without Anunnaki spirit and without Anunnaki morals and virtues. These were savage slaves that resembled the Anunnaki but were violent beasts. The council decided that such an abomination must never be allowed to progress, because they would be a cancerous infestation to the universe and a danger to any other species they encountered. But because of Anunnaki morals, the genocide of a related race was nearly unthinkable. So they decided to let a natural event destroy this abomination. They knew that Nibiru's next close pass by the earth would cause massive flooding, wiping out the abomination. They decided to let it happen. Enki didn't want to lose this opportunity to have a kingdom of his own, so he went against the orders of the council and protected segments of his created beings from the flood. When the council learnt of this, they were livid, and Enki paid a price for his treachery. But this left a growing species that was still as dangerous as ever. Satan, a reptilian, petitioned the council to eradicate man, so the threat would be contained. But man's true savior, Lord Enlil, who was Lord Rael, fought against Satan in front of the council on behalf of man. Lord Enlil argued that man was part Anunnaki and therefore possessed the divine spark, and if properly educated and nurtured, they could one day be equals. Satan vehemently disagreed, asserting that a species cannot be taught to have morals, that the law of love is either written in their hearts or it is not. The council found logic in both sides of the argument and offered a compromise. Since Satan was man's chief accuser, he and his people would be allowed to utilize part of Lord Enlil's plan to educate, but at the same time weed out those that would not be capable of evolving. The plan would give Satan a set amount of time to fulfill this directive, after which he was to hand over the earth to its rightful custodians, the Anunnaki, at which point those that were considered evolvable would be educated and nurtured under the Anunnaki for a period of 1,000 years, before becoming full and free members of the council themselves. All sides reluctantly agreed, but Satan did not believe that man should ever be allowed into the universe, and he developed a very cruel system to cause man to live, die, and be trapped in this cycle, so that man would forget the lessons he had learned, and he would have to start from scratch after each incarnation. Satan then created a group to dominate man, giving them the knowledge man lost between incarnations. This group was given an infusion of reptilian DNA, so they would be more intelligent and less compassionate, and thus be better equipped to dominate the Anunnaki seed line, which is human. When Lord Enlil learnt of this, he went before the council, stating that this is no better than what Enki did. The council disagreed, stating that man was most likely going to be destroyed anyway, so if Satan needed to do something unconventional that may help man accelerate in his progress, what was the harm? The harm was lesser Anunnaki souls being thwarted in a death-rebirth cycle that was not going to fulfill the plan of man's evolution. Lord Enlil took matters into his own hands. Lord Enlil had a staging area set up on the planet within the Anunnaki Empire, where souls would come between lifetimes, have their past life reviewed and recorded, and then have them returned to the earth for their next incarnation. This ensured that the lessons of each lifetime would not be lost, and that the memories could be reinfused if necessary, so each person would have the total value of all their life lessons gained over all their lifetimes. He then had to open a path for these souls to escape Earth on death, so they could come to the staging area. This is why he came to the earth 2,000 years ago, as the Christ, to open the light tunnel and save the souls of man. Lord Enlil has incarnated more than once here, to ensure that man's path remains on course to apotheosis. Now let us delve deeper into this ancient account. Let us consider this from the perspective of Lord Anu. If you were a father of 2 boys, and one did something very bad that caused him to be cast out, creating a situation that his brother had to repair, and provoking a long and contentious rift between the 2 siblings, You might try create a redemptive path by which your prodigal son may return to honor, while fomenting a situation that would bring the brothers back to each other's love. It seems that Lord Anu has done exactly this. A number of people have asked if Enki was reincarnated, and if so, where he is presently located. In the not-so-distant past we were unsure, and yet occasionally offered limited speculation. The general public was advised that the Holy King's imperial regent was not at liberty to gossip about a royal within the Holy Family. However, the Torah code has now revealed his true identity. It must be said that Enki is not an evil being. He simply allowed ambition to get the better of his judgment, leading him to violate an ethical restriction of the Anunnaki. If he hadn't performed that violation, none of you would be here today. So in the same way one looks at a deadly hurricane with great umbrage, one must also remember that the hurricane will bring forth water and blossom to the desert. The royals have incredibly high moral standards. So if they were going to allow Enki back to a place of honor, receiving absolution for his sin, he would have to perform an immense penance that would humble him while demonstrating that his divine right to rule was not lost through his transgression. But for this to be genuine, his penance would have to be served in the dark, keeping the truth hidden from him or anyone who could possibly interfere in any way, including his brother Enlil, who we know as Lord Rael. So Enki was forced to come to Earth over and over again, living and suffering with each generation of man, so he could feel their pain and gain the perspective of the agony an unenlightened sentient life must endure through its evolutionary ascension. Only in this way could he fully understand why the unauthorized creation of sentient beings is a great sin among the membership of the Council. Enki endured the pain each time, suffering greatly, but simultaneously helping man grow in greatness, even giving man the laws that would become the foundation for all of the great societies of Earth, which was no small task when walking through a desert for 40 years. Yes, Enki is Moses. Enki is Cardinal Richard Ruff, and only because we are at the very end of days, God has revealed this long-hidden truth to him, because our brother has made it through this terrible penance and has victoriously overcome his ancient transgression. He has earned the right to share our Lord's throne. Revelation 3:21. And I shall grant the overcomer to sit with me on my throne, just as I have overcome and sit with my Father on his throne. The clues were always there, like Richard Ruff's personal Torah codes, referring to him as a criminal, while also calling him Lord Rael's brother, or the Jewish tradition that says Moses returns each generation, or that he wasn't allowed to enter the Promised Land after all he endured during the Exodus, or Lord Rael's mysterious promise of Revelation 3:21. Because the royals are not known for sharing planetary rulership with anyone outside the divine line, no matter how meritorious their service to the crown has been. Enki is divine. The Bible says that Enki will sit with the Lord upon his throne, So this indicates a somewhat subordinate position, but this can be called co-rulership. Enki will be third in royal succession. Lord Anu, Lord Enlil, who was Lord Rayam, Lord Enki, who was Cardinal Richard Ruff. The royal tree of Lord Anu hath bed double fruit, with two wonderful sons, who for a time were segregated from each other, but are now being reunited in their grand mission. It is a glorious day for a family reunion and reconciliation, and we are all immensely proud of Cardinal Richard Ruff. Praise be to God. The Torah codes have confirmed this fantastic discovery just in time to prepare for the great day of the Lord. Amen.
We are live. This is the council. I'm Cardinal Clark Isaac. I'm here with Brother Matt Staader, Cardinal of the Ecumenical Order of Christ. Brother Matt, good to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
I want to give a little bit of a preamble to what we're talking about today. We want to talk about some ancient human history, but something that goes beyond human history as well. And this is pretty important stuff. A lot of people are talking about this online. The Anunnaki. And we want to get into this. We also want to get into a biblical perspective of this. And this is about the Anunnaki Empire and this connection to the kingdom of heaven.
And there are actually a lot more connections there than most people, even people who have studied the Bible, Christians, could possibly realize.
Oh, yeah. And we had some important revelations displayed on the stream ahead of time. A video that Armageddon Broadcast Network, a close affiliate to the Ecumenical Order of Christ, produced years ago. Really important stuff, revealing the identity of Enlil, of Enki, talking about ancient
Probably the two most
history.
important people aside from God himself in human history.
Yeah, the two most important people on Earth, especially today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, give us a brief introduction of what you want to talk about today.
To summarize, I would like to talk about some of the ancient symbolism that was most commonly seen in the ruins of the Sumerian civilization and other Mesopotamian cultures, how that transitioned and some of it survived into the modern day with very similar meanings, and how we can see a correlation between what the Sumerians spoke about is what they saw happening in their own era compared to how it's described in Genesis, and how we can see scientific correlations in the world today. Also in reference to the destruction of the Tower of Babel and how that ties in, and how there's carvings and statues and things like that from all over the world that show the exact same thing, and that itself has been spreading across the internet. A lot more people have been taking notice of that in recent years as well. So I could give a little bit of context on that, I'm hoping.
Very interesting. And some of the context that that you've given to me before we started here was some scriptural references from the Hebrew text of the Bible, particularly the book of Genesis. Right?
Yeah.
And we're also going to be discussing Raelite teaching. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Rael, or Lord Rael, is the returned Messiah and has been revealed to be Enlil.
Yes.
God, little g, God of the Anunnaki Empire, well known through the Sumerian tablets.
Very well known. It's, well, just as we were saying a few minutes ago, the two most prevalent beings spoken of in the Sumerian tablets, Enki and Enlil. And although their roles in early mankind and how they interacted with us were very different then to how they are now, and there was even vast changes in how that interrelationship happened across the course of history.
This is a very exciting topic.
Yeah, I've always loved this. Has been my favourite topic for a very long time.
Yeah, I'm grateful you get to share that enthusiasm with us. Really appreciate that. And your knowledge, too.
Well,
quite well versed in this. I've spoken to you in the past on this.
It's something I've been studying since I was 16 years old. 1996.
Yeah, I know some of the best conversations I've had on this topic. You were standing right there, doing most of the talking. Were it not for the Lord himself.
Well, I can't argue with his knowledge.
Oh, why would you?
Of course.
It mostly is just Q&A, like what I'm doing with you today. And I'm grateful that you get to share some of the Lord's knowledge with us as well.
I'm hoping that I can relay it faithfully, accurately.
God willing.
Amen.
Should I bring up one of the first images you wanted to discuss?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see about that. So this image, I'm familiar with this actually. I was a medic in the Army for a couple of years, the U.S. Army, and this is the medical symbol.
Yeah.
Also known as the caduceus, right?
Caduceus, or I'm not sure of the pronunciation, to be honest.
But yeah, it's
something
that we use across the medical field.
It was actually your history in the Semitic that inspired me to begin with this
Oh.
particular symbol.
I'm honored. It wasn't the best history of my life, but so some of it I choose to forget. But we've actually got another image that portrays that here for people to see that context.
It's of course, the rod of Hermes with the twin coiled. Well, of course, there's some representations of it as well, which show a single snake.
Right, and this has a deeper meaning. But yeah, like you said, the rod of Hermes. Hermes was a Greek god, right? And he carried this rod that had the same symbolism, and his role was as a messenger from the gods of Olympus onto
delivering wisdom to mankind.
Right. Now I think that's really important to know, to bring wisdom to mankind while he's carrying this symbol on his staff. That's got to mean something.
Well, the rod itself has been for a long time in accounts of interaction, between deities and mankind. The rod itself has been a common symbol that has been related even down through to Genesis. Not Genesis, Revelation was the Lord will rule the world with a rod of iron. Even through to Revelation it continues. But the winged part of the symbol connects back to going back all the way to the Sumerian civilization, the oldest civilization on Earth, where the Anunnaki, as was commonly portrayed in the video that we began with, they were symbolically represented by the eagle.
Okay.
With wings spread.
And you see this on this image that we brought up here.
Now, I can't be certain that I'm not sure if it's some kind of vessel, and I'm not sure.
It does have cuneiform writing on it. You can see it written there. So
but of course, the cuneiform was first found with Sumerian, but it was also continued. The continued use of revised versions of it continued through later Mesopotamian cultures after Sumeria was destroyed. For one, yeah. Then you had Acadia. Mesopotamia itself, of course, that whole period is referred to as the Mesopotamian period, but there was a Mesopotamian culture in itself that the name derives from. But the Sumerian shows that they had an alphabet that began with over 1,000 characters. But as history proceeded, that alphabet did get narrowed down to some extent. But yeah, there's clearly cuneiform there, so it is definitely from a Mesopotamian type culture. But what we can see on the front side of the vessel is those twin coiled snakes.
Right here in the middle.
And the rod is there as well.
And you see these serpents standing next to it, holding these rods with wings.
Yeah.
Some kind of crown on their head. It's really interesting. And there's a correlation, a connection between these serpents that you wanted me to show here.
It has been... This particular image itself, in addition to having the crossbars between the points where the serpents intertwine, at the bottom there is something that almost looks like a drop of blood, which, well, that's just how it looks to me. But it's been a common... I'm not the only one who was speaking of this, and it's not my original idea. I'm not claiming that. But there's a definite visual connection between this and a strand of DNA, the double helix.
So that could have something to do with this secret knowledge that God Hermes brought down to the earth, that the Anunnaki were revealing to ancient Sumeria.
Well, I believe my own personal thing is, I'm thinking the very foundations of teaching mankind medical treatment was probably the wisdom that came from Hermes.
Interesting.
What could be more important than, well, aside from agriculture, things like that, teaching for these higher powers to teach mankind how to care for their own health would be a vitally important thing. But, of course, I was about to refer back to the video that was playing and the initial creation of mankind done through the manipulation of DNA. And it's not that we were just created, of course the Bible says, depending on the verse, the translation that you look at, that man was created either from the dust or the clay of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And symbolically speaking, there's two associations there, specifically with clay. That's the clay can be taken to mean like modelling clay, just something that these beings with so much knowledge and wisdom and power could just manipulate it, like modelling clay.
Well, I mean, Christians, they believe that God created mankind.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're saying is that the Anunnaki created mankind. Is there scripture to support that?
There is, in the Old Testament alone, there is somewhere around 2,750 uses of the word Elohim, the Hebrew word, obviously. In almost every modern translation of the Bible, it is simply reduced down to God. But as you can see with the wording here, this is Genesis 1:26, and Elohim said, "Let us make humanity in our image, and according to our likeness. Let them hold sway over the fish of the sea, and over the flyer of the heavens, over the domestic beast, over every land animal, and over every creeper that is creeping on the earth." Now, this context, it clearly portrays Elohim, whereas the common Christian, and probably I would argue the common understanding of every one of the three Abrahamic faiths, is that use of God as a singular term. And of course, everything happens because of God, himself the Father. Not disputing that whatsoever. But the clear context given here is, linguistically, Elohim is a plural term, and it is reinforced by we.
So the scripture this whole time has been saying that this pluralistic form of God, a representation of God which is many, are the ones that created mankind in their image.
Yeah.
But it was by their hands. Which kind of...
according to the will of God. Yes.
Right. But the Christian narrative is that whether it be by miracle or some other method that is undescribed, this actually does add some context that helps us to understand how it was done.
Yeah.
Especially when you connect the dots between the cultures and the histories therein.
A quote comes to mind, and to explain, of course, given the whole biblical, the message from God that witchcraft and by extension magic are an abomination to him, I'm not going down that path. But the power of God itself, as it's portrayed in Christianity, from a human perspective, could be perceived as a kind of magic that is exclusive to him in itself. But
or science.
I was just about to say, I think it's Arthur C. Clarke, and I can't remember the exact quote, I'm sorry, but any sufficiently advanced technology is indiscernible from magic to a lesser civilization.
Could you repeat that?
I'll try. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indiscernible from magic to to an appropriately inferior civilization.
Right. I mean, they show that kind of stuff on Star Trek, right? When Picard comes onto the planet, or Captain Kirk, whichever generation of Star Trek you prefer. Forgive me if you're one of the older guys or gals. But when they come to a new planet that's not experienced enough or advanced enough, if they were to break their prime directive.
Prime directive to
Right.
not interfere with the development of a lesser civilization.
Right. I'm more familiar with that. But if they were to do that, then it would appear as something like magic to them.
Absolutely, yeah.
It would be so primitive not to understand. So we, human beings, we're becoming advanced enough now to where we're ready to start understanding some of these things.
Starting to look at these things with access to and an understanding of more faithful translations of the scriptures.
But the ancient man may not have seen it that way.
Absolutely.
And they would have labeled such things as magic or maybe miracles.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
Very interesting. And I think the scripture is really important too. For those of you who aren't familiar with the software, it's the Interlinear Scripture Analyzer, number 3. It's the beta edition, but it works perfectly fine in representing the Hebrew and the Greek, both from Old Testament and New Testament. So if people want to look that up and they want to have an offline source, that's what we're using here today. I'm going to bring back up this web browser where we're looking at these images. There was another thing you wanted to talk to me about, and that was about mixing DNA, right?
Yes. This is more from the Sumerian translations than anything scriptural initially, that early mankind did not have the ability to reproduce on their own. And the topic itself, words like Adam, it originates from a much older word which isn't a name but a title, which means first man. And in the Sumerian Anunnaki type context of that, the biblical Adam himself was not there were others. It wasn't just one of each. Although, trying to explain why it was reduced to just 2 individuals for the purpose of the writing of Genesis is a much bigger topic that I don't think we should go into right now. It will be explained, but now is not the time for it.
Maybe we'll cover a little bit of that at the end of the show. If you want, we could get into that.
Well, that starts going into...
Well, the reason I bring that up is because there's a Raylight teaching on the topic of Genesis. And I believe it does touch into that topic a bit, if I'm not mistaken.
True. But for the direction I was heading in was the genetic structure of mankind as created by the Anunnaki was revised, upgraded from time to time. And the initial versions, even with the first few subsequent updates, to put it in the term of like software development, they were still essentially hybrids, because the Anunnaki used primarily primate DNA, but other things were added in. The other primary source was from pigs, which gave apes 2 abilities which modern science, mainstream science, cannot explain. The primary one is that humans have the diet which can consume both meat and plant matter.
Omnivore.
Omnivorous. Thank you.
Okay.
The teeth structure as well.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't match with apes, and there's no...
Yeah, their metabolism is different.
The metabolism as well, and also the ability to store a layer of fat as stored energy under the skin. apes, no form of ape that I'm aware of has that. It's not even a dormant gene.
Mm-hmm.
That was introduced from a fragment of pig DNA, and I believe that is one of the reasons, and it's a common sense explanation, that at least in Judaism and Islam both, the consumption of pork is forbidden.
Interesting.
There is also that common methods in ancient times for preserving pork meat was primarily smoking. But these methods, because they're essentially given the feeding habits of pigs, to put it in a simple context, they're very prone to being infested with parasites.
As are humans.
Yeah. But another
Think it's for that
similarity
reason.
there. I don't know how, naturally, like in nature, I'm not sure about how prone to parasitic infection apes are. It's not something I've ever really looked into. But the methods for preserving pork meat, going way back, the smoking, was not sufficient to remove that parasitic infection. And so it was just deemed not advisable and unclean for humans to consume it.
I want to get back into the act of mixing DNAs, and I know it's written in scripture that there were fallen angels that created the Nephilim by breeding with mankind, and there was also some mention of that in the book of Enoch.
Well, that corresponded with, well, I'm not sure if they happened at exactly the same time, but where I was going before with the different versions of mankind and the revision trying to improve upon the creation, all of the early versions were infertile. And we see this in common. There are certain species of animals on Earth that do, in the wild, interbreed with each other, most notably lions and tigers. And I think we've got that image there. But the offspring of that interbreeding are hybrid creatures, and there's two different kinds, depending on which animal is the father and which one's the mother. But the resulting offspring is always infertile. And if we look at a potential correlation between the tree, Eve biting the apple from the tree of knowledge, I can't help but see a correlation between that and what's a relatively outdated term now being carnal knowledge or sexual interaction, as being symbolic of mankind being given the ability to reproduce. Is reproduce on their own without um, any kind of interference from the Anunnaki. And I suppose the question is, would human science ever develop to the point where we could genetically enhance one of these offspring in tigers and things like that? The other one that just occurred to me is black bears and polar bears. In recent years, due to the reduction of ice at the North Pole, the polar bears have less stable habitat that they're used to hunting on, and there's been cases of them interbreeding with black bears. I can't remember what that one's called. A growler bear, I think they've been nicknamed. But
Well, I have a question for you.
yeah,
The Anunnaki are represented in the Bible as the Elohim, right? But the Anunnaki are a specific race of aliens outside of this world. From heaven to earth came, as what Anunnaki means in ancient Sumerian. But Were they the only ones involved in the creation and alteration of human DNA?
Initially, yes, they were the first ones here, but they aren't. The Anunnaki is a dualistic term.
Mm-hmm.
They are both a race, and it is a term with a larger context that refers to an entire empire that encompasses multiple advanced civilizations from throughout the Milky Way galaxy, at least.
Oh, that's wild. So this is like, I mean, bringing it back to Star Trek again, this is almost like a federation of planets, but with a different type of governing body.
Well, we see references in some sources to the Council, or the Anunnaki Council, which always had a symbolic number of 12. And that number itself does seem to be repeated at like several times in scripture alone.
So the 12 on this council, right? They're representing different races within the empire.
The information on that is a little limited, but we can surmise at least some of them. There's the two other races out there that have had the most interaction with humans, the reptilians and what are commonly referred to as the Greys or the Ejiji, and both of them have had a significant role in the development of mankind.
And there's more than that too, but we're just not given a lot of information about
That
it, right?
is very limited at this time.
Like I've heard about like these cat-like people that kind of look like lions.
Anthropomorphic, humanoid.
Yeah, and then there was like the Pleiadians or like Nordics.
They are the Pleiadians physically and mentally are very similar to the Anunnaki race themselves. They're almost like cousins.
Oh.
Some minor differences in appearance.
What would you say would be the difference in their like philosophies?
I'd say the philosophies are close enough to identical to just call them that.
I've heard that they've had quite a different history, though.
Well, every civilization, even advanced civilizations, are still developing.
Mm.
They are evolving and improving. And I suppose if we're not all striving to improve on ourselves and our society around us in general, what are we doing? But
there's truth to that.
I digress.
And you might see that in the Bible too, if you look at it from that perspective. To think, okay, well, here's the Elohim interacting with mankind. Now, if they're the Anunnaki, and you represent, the Sumerian side of things with the biblical, and you kind of tie the two together. Really, this is the Anunnaki trying to create and improve on an inheritor of their kingdom on Earth.
Initially, mankind was only created essentially as a labor force. But an alteration was made that transitioned mankind from simply being a created being into being a relative, a biological relative of the Anunnaki themselves.
Mm.
And the original plan, when they were infertile, was once the labor that mankind was created for was completed, the Anunnaki could simply leave. The remaining created beings would simply grow old and die. And there would be no long-term negative impact to this planet. But the alteration that was made...
The plan changed.
Not entirely according to everyone's intentions, but it was changed.
Wasn't it Enki that started all that?
It was Enki who introduced Anunnaki DNA directly into the mix, into the genome of mankind.
So he basically, instead of asking permission, he ended up asking forgiveness. And we've heard that before.
And I would argue that he's been asking forgiveness ever since.
Mm. Yeah.
But that's the video at the beginning did reference some of that, but it's probably a bigger topic with a lot more philosophical discussion. And
oh, yeah.
I don't think that's...
Well, we're going to have Richard Ruff on the show.
That would be a great show.
Probably next week.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. I hope you get to tune in.
But regardless of how you perceive whether was he in the right, was he in the wrong, that's not really for us to judge, because if he hadn't have done that, none of us would be here now. But this is my own personal interpretation. It just seems like a common sense way to associate things to me, is that infusion of Anunnaki DNA is what gave mankind the ability to reproduce on their own, going back to that carnal knowledge reference that I made earlier. And that's, again, the verse that refers directly to that, which I said before, let us make man in our own image and likeness, which would suggest that Enki wasn't the only one in support of this idea, but that addition of Anunnaki DNA would have transitioned mankind from looking something more like Neanderthal, by my interpretation, into a creature that more closely resembled, obviously, the Anunnaki on a physical level.
Wow.
And would have given them a higher concept of self-awareness, the ability to know right from wrong. Again, another reference to knowledge. And Genesis directly says that.
So, I mean, we've got many cultures and religious perspectives throughout antiquity. I know these days religions are mostly monotheistic, mostly what's remaining on the earth today. But if you go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years, even, there was a lot of different perspectives to consider. But I mean, were they all kind of telling the same story?
Well, even amongst the Anunnaki, there was a period where individual members of the Anunnaki were revered as gods, lowercase g, of course, by their own individual civilizations, by their own kingdoms, which is, I'm not sure if it's a topic we have time to get into right now, but the concept of god kings, it's a concept that is still relatively recent, has relatively recent history in Asian countries such as China, where their emperor was believed to, when they still had an emperor, was believed to be a descendant of the gods himself.
Do you think they were the same as the Sumerian gods, the Anunnaki, or were they different seed line?
I believe the Asian civilization as a whole has a separate origin from, I would say, the same of the people of Africa, the people of the Americas.
The Nordics.
The Nordic, well, getting back to your mention of the Pleiadians earlier, generally speaking, in their physical appearance, they are very unique. Generally paler complexion, more common red or blonde hair, and the blue or green eyes. This is the physical description of the Pleiadians.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of ancient cultures, they would depict their gods oftentimes looking somewhat like themselves. I think that might have had something to do with where they came from.
Well, I think there was a certain blueprint set in place for these groups that came here wanting to create their own version of mankind, following in the footsteps of the Anunnaki. But the version of what had already been created was determined to be something of a blueprint. So to make it easier for the variously sourced versions of humanity, what would become humanity, in different parts of the world, we know that the more similar someone is to ourselves, the easier it is for us to interact with them.
Well, I wouldn't say that's across the board that they all looked like their gods,
I
but
don't.
yeah, I mean, I guess an
I mean, the
example.
creations were made to look according to, were created in a certain appearance,
Right.
which had some traits of their originator.
But not all of them.
No.
Right. So, like, basically the Anunnaki DNA set and the apes and the swine that they had used as a basis, essentially as a framework for other races in the Empire to work with.
Yeah.
And what was the purpose of these races adding their own DNA on this planet?
The civilizations of all of the other advanced worlds out there are, at a spiritual level, immortal. They have different methods of creating a physical body, but they can change that as easily as you or I would change our clothing.
Wow.
It's just transition from one to the other. Now,
so they wouldn't fear death the way that we do. It's not like something unknown to them.
I would still say a painful death would be avoided.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't want to step on a nail, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I'm sure that many of them have gone through that, and they're not as, like, for us, it would be a fear of the unknown, which is
that's
why
a big
most people
part of it,
fear
yeah.
death, yeah?
But yeah, just say arguably that these advanced civilizations are capable of engineering these bodies that age at a much slower rate than what we are. Is, say, 5,000 years, to throw a number out there.
Uh-huh.
So, not look. And
well, if they already have bodies where they're at, why do they need to put? Are they sending souls down here for a purpose?
Not sending them here. Anytime a human child is conceived, a new soul is created as well.
Okay.
Now, of course, there is a difference between a spirit and a soul. The spirits have knowledge, they have wisdom going back to possibly the beginning of time.
So that they've lived other lives.
Many different... I don't know if living different lives is the best way to put it. That is a human context, like where we sort of get into the realm of reincarnation.
Well, that's kind of what we're already in, aren't
we? We are getting into that kind of a context, yeah, because reincarnation is a real thing, and Christ spoke of it himself, though most mentions of it were removed from commonly available Bibles. There is one that remains, and I cannot remember the actual chapter or verse, where Yeshua said, in reference to John the Baptist, that he is Elijah.
Oh, yeah.
Who is to come.
Yeah.
And that is a clear reference to say that John the Baptist in his time was a reincarnation of the prophet Elijah. And I could get into the topic of reincarnation and talk for hours, but I don't think we have time for that. Going back to what you were first asking me, with the conception of a human child, a soul is created, but there is also the opportunity for a human soul that has already lived on this earth to reincarnate back into that body, and the two souls actually merge together. Now, the way things currently are at the moment, that reincarnated soul will lose all of their previous memories, will be inaccessible in this new lifetime, but they'll still have the opportunity to learn.
Right, but
new experiences, at living in a new era.
Let me get back to my earlier question. What's the reason why multiple races within and civilizations within the Anunnaki Empire would have any interest in Earth and humanity in terms of adding their DNA, influencing cultures, and that sort of thing?
By my understanding, and Lord Rael spoke about this himself shortly after his return, that once the plan in regard to their own descendants in mankind were beginning to proliferate on Earth, the other worlds out there saw an immense learning opportunity in the development of, by my understanding, all of these spirits have been around and have essentially known nothing of mortality as a concept, as anything other than a concept. They've never experienced it because their spirits have essentially been in existence for as long as creation itself.
So living a finite life as we do, or at least the perception of it, would give you sort of a newfound appreciation for life.
Absolutely. And even those who, well, we have the Lord himself, who is on earth the biological progenitor of the bloodline of King David. And we see in Scripture the significance attributed to Yeshua himself being a descendant of that bloodline on both. And the way I understand it, there is a certain, for it, an eternal soul to incarnate into a human body. It is made much easier if there is a genetic match between the originator and the vessel of the spirit. It helps the two to mesh together more easily.
I want to address the audience real quick,
Okay,
if you don't mind. Sorry for the interruption. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put it forward in the chats. We are monitoring YouTube and Twitch on this live stream. If you have any questions, again, please put them there, and we'll try to answer them towards the end of this stream. Okay, thank you.
One of the things, I'm just looking at the image on the screen here, and it's
bring that up for the audience here.
Sorry, I thought that one was already visible.
No, that's all right.
Okay. One of the things that, and I just thought of another image that matches in modern day, the reference to cargo cults from the World War II era. But the Tower of Babel is the image that we have on the screen here, under construction. And it was actually a form of a launch platform for the Anunnaki to return to where they came from.
That's what it was before humans built this?
The Tower of Babel was a human reproduction of it, created by mankind, or an attempted reproduction. And if we look at it biblically, there is the verse which basically says, I can't remember it word for word.
I'll try to look it up while you're talking there.
Now that they have achieved this, nothing will be impossible for them. And mankind at the time was still seen by the Anunnaki as a primitive race, and if they were to achieve the ability to leave Earth in that time, it would have been very dangerous for all concerned. And so the decision was made to destroy the tower, scatter the people of Babylon to the different corners of the earth, and to alter their language so that they could not communicate with each other and share that knowledge to continue on this path of technological development.
I did find the verse here. Would you like me to read it?
Please, yes.
So this is from the book of Genesis, chapter 11. This goes from verse 4 to verse 8. And they said, Go, to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men built. And the Lord said, Behold, the people are one, meaning that they're unified, right? And they have all one language, and this they begin to do. Now nothing will be restrained unto them. anything that they choose to do.
They will eventually achieve it no matter what.
Exactly. And everything that they imagine will come into action.
Yeah.
Now go, let us go down, and let us confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from hence upon the face of the whole earth, and they left from building the city and the tower.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which brings me into it. We see from ancient civilizations all around the world, we see a lot of similar imagery. And there is a common one which shows a figure depicting what is commonly described as a handbag and a pine cone. There's 3 examples of it just there from 3 different civilizations on Earth.
Interesting. So that's which civilizations are those, do you think?
The earliest one, the one on the left, is Sumerian itself. And we see the wings on the back there, which is a clear correlation to angels. The one in the middle, I think,
That's Babylonian, because that's Dagon. I recognize the fish hat.
it's a member of the Dagon priesthood of Dagon, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Now, it's whether it's specifically Babylonian or not, I'm not certain, but definitely in that Mesopotamian culture.
Right, but this one on the right here, that's completely different
It's
culture.
South American of some,
Maybe
probably
Mayan?
Aztec.
Aztec or Mayan?
Yeah.
Okay. But they're holding something similar in their hand.
You can clearly see all 3 have the bag, which
So I guess the gods like to roll around with a man purse. Is that it, or what is that?
well, that's essentially what it is. There's a lot of people out there that try to attribute mystical type association with it, but it was simply an object for carrying items around.
There's also something else similar. I know they're not circling it really. Well, I mean they kind of are, but they're not focusing on it. And that's this little. Was it a sundial or a watch on their
The
wrist?
wristwatch, yeah.
All 3 of them have that too.
Actually, of course, I didn't even think of that when I was.
So this is like similar, not just clothing style, but utility
Yeah.
that was common between. Well, maybe these weren't even different gods. Maybe these were all the same gods, just in different parts of the world represented.
Well, like we get back to the concept of the Anunnaki themselves. There were, according to Sumerian records, anywhere up to 600 of them on the planet
Interesting.
at any one time. And so, yeah, the multiple different people, or individuals, I should say. I'm not sure if people fits. They're still people.
Sure, why not?
Now,
Aliens are people too.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
So are angels, and yeah, they're all individuals, and they can make their own choices. Some choose to obey their king or their emperor or their god, however you want to put it. It's just a matter of perspective, really.
Yeah, that's trying to understand the full story is key to, because we have our limited human context, but trying to look at things in a greater scope is very important, I think.
We've got some more images we can bring up on the same thing.
Which shows the exact same thing from multiple different periods and locations across human history. And to be honest, I can't name all of them. But we also see different headdresses. Some just have like a human face, some have the most common one depicted here is a bird's head type helmet. And it's a common thing in modern media to give little hints away. The people behind like theatrical productions, like movies and things like that, will put references to some of these things in movies. And a good example that comes to mind with those images is Stargate.
Interesting.
the original movie. The two guards that the god Ra in that movie had, that had the helmets that resembled what was found in Egyptian hieroglyphs.
So you think they were trying to kind of give us a message there with that? With Stargate, for example.
Definitely. I think what we're seeing there is actually more like the helmet of a spacesuit, not necessarily an actual living being that has the head of a bird, but that's how it was perceived by mankind.
It's pretty smart that they would do that, and that they knew anything about that. Somebody knew something, basically, is
Yeah.
what we're saying here.
Well, artistic interpretation is definitely a factor. But yeah.
There could be somebody behind the scenes that's got some knowledge.
Of course.
But they're putting it out in a way that,
is
artistic liberties, so to speak.
Yeah. Easily acceptable.
Mm.
Now,
I'll go ahead and bring this up for the audience, too. What are we looking at here?
This one is, I think it's fairly obvious. If we look at an image, and I should have brought that one up as well, but everybody knows from the moon landing in the late 60s, we had the lunar orbiter and the landing craft attached to the nose cone of that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and look that up, because I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about that Mayan temple reference, right?
No, I'm talking about the actual craft that mankind used to land on the moon. Humanity used to land on the moon in 1968. The lunar orbiter and lander.
Compared to what?
If you just bring up that image, or compared to, try Dingir, Dingir.
Let's see what this comes up with. So Dengir?
Dingir. That you used to be able to find images showing the comparison visually between the two. That was several years ago. Try
to like ancient comparison. Yeah. Well, that's all right. I mean, let's paint a picture for our audience with
the top row, second one from the left.
This one?
If you can bring that one up. Now, this doesn't exactly... No, that's not the one, sorry.
Well, the audience isn't really seeing what we're talking about, so let's just describe it to them, yeah?
Well, the lunar orbiter and the landing craft, from the very first moon landing of Apollo 11, it had something with the physical structure that basically resembled a rocket, but short. And the lander, the craft that was used for the moon landing, attached... If you bring up the one second row down, second from the left, that one there, yep.
Try to bring this up full screen for the audience here.
Okay, thank you. The top of that attached to the nose cone of the rocket shape of the lunar orbiter. And that's how the two of them docked together. Now that other image, the blue and white, if anyone should be able to visualize that, it's a fairly easy thing to picture in your mind with that image there. But if you bring up that blue and white image again that we had.
Yeah, I'll bring that up real quick.
Okay, leave it on that. That's just as good.
Yep.
This depiction of it even shows that previous blue and white image is of two different objects that can separate from each other.
So it's like a modulated spacecraft.
Yeah. Where part would remain in orbit, and the Anunnaki would use the gear, the GIR section of it, to descend to the Earth, and then to launch again.
They would dock with it again to go further out.
Yeah.
Into their heavenly empire.
And I would argue that while the Tower of Babel was a very enlarged version of it, if you could go to the next image, which shows something similar but vertically arranged.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're talking about here. Yeah, let's show the audience this. This is very interesting. Where's this coming from?
This appears to be a drawing based on a Mesopotamian carving, or like someone's taken that image and turned it into basically just a line drawing to more clearly portray.
It looks like a missile silo.
Yeah.
Because you can see it's kind of. I mean, you look at this and there's trees growing and animals and people standing up there, and then they've got what kind of looks like it's underground, part of it.
Yeah. The missile section itself is clearly above ground, but the base for it, and I can't remember the last time I had a chance to analyse the construction of a 5,000-year-old alien rocket, but clearly, to me, it represents like a solid platform like a solid foundation from which that spacecraft can be launched.
They've even got like these curved things that look like the way that the exhaust from the rocket would flow through in such a way that would be more efficient, you know? Like, you see a launch platform for NASA, and they've got these vents that come out the bottom that divert the exhaust in such a way that...
Divert it and also suppress it with a big cloud of steam.
Right, but it makes it so the air pressure above the rocket isn't affected, or air pressure around and above the rocket isn't affected by the exhaust.
Exactly.
So that's kind of what's going on here, right?
Yeah, definitely.
What people are looking at with all these little designs, it's not just like, oh, it's a cool doodle. It's actually technology represented by ancient man.
If you could bring up, there was another image, if you could look up cargo cults. And this was a common thing.
Cargo cults?
Yes. This was a common thing in Pacific Islands during World War II, when most historically notable...
Which one of these would you say? Maybe this one right here? Or
that isn't about... That's... I prefer something that was photographed. Yep, that'll do. That would suit it perfectly.
Okay, let me bring this up for everybody.
In particular, US military forces were establishing bases, relatively basic but suitable for their needs at the time, where they could land planes and take off again. And they were giving they were sharing their food, their rations and stuff like that, with the native populations. And the bottom of that image that's up on the screen there shows the native inhabitants of one of these islands. Now, at the end of the war, they had I just noticed there's a cell phone carved out of wood there as well.
Oh yeah,
which they probably wouldn't have had during World War II.
No, but
the point still stands. Probably the best way. Well, I'm not sure about radar dishes either, but the plane in the top right corner. After the war ended and the US military, and I think others like the Australian Army, did have basic airstrips established on some of these islands. After they left, the native populations of these islands no longer had that supply of food that was being shared with them. And, we liked that. So they started building, and this is historical fact, their own depictions of the planes, the aircraft that were on these airstrips, just out of wood, sticks and banana leaves, all tied together with vines and whatever they had available.
Right, so it's a representation, basically, of primitive man interacting with a much more advanced
trying to bring
culture.
back an advanced civilization that I don't want to say that they perceived the US military as gods, but
Little G.
Not even that. Just
Maybe. Who knows? I mean, they built these effigies.
yes, and it was in an attempt to bring back these more advanced people. How probably the best way I want to term it, and the food and the resources that they were sharing with the native people. And I see a very direct, and I think anyone should be able to see a very direct correlation between that and the construction of the Tower of Babel.
So human beings were trying to reproduce what they saw,
Reproduce the power of the advanced civilizations that they saw.
And probably things they in some ways directly experienced.
Witnessed firsthand, definitely.
Wow. Now I want to. We've been at this for about an hour now, which is great.
Time flies.
Yeah, it does fly when you're having fun, right? I think we should talk a little bit about some of the Rayleigh teachings on this topic before we close out.
Yeah.
But probably some more about the context of what we were mainly talking about, which is like the DNA and the like. And I think we can recite, some of the teaching to give people that. And
yes, you did bring up the Nephilim earlier, and we sort of steered away from that. So.
We did, but it's okay. I mean, now's the time, right?
Yeah.
So this story, the ancient Sumerian story that most people who know about this story are familiar with, the perspective of people who followed and worshipped Enki.
Yeah.
Now, the story perspective that we're giving now is the perspective of Enlil.
Yeah.
Which is not typically known.
It's not typically portrayed because in his time, for better or worse, in the perspective that he had at the time, Enki wanted a kingdom for himself. And he tried as best he could with the capabilities that he had at the time to erase the record of any reverence to any other of the other Anunnaki.
Well, he did admit that his brother was the inheritor of the kingdom.
Yeah.
So, when we come across the record of Enlil's perspective, it should be viewed as more reputable.
You would think so, yeah.
Yeah. So this is the most reputable version of the creation story and the fall of the fallen angels and the creation of the Nephilim that's available today, as opposed to even the Sumerian tablets.
Yeah.
So let's get started with this. Yeah. You want to go ahead and read it for us?
Yeah. As you mentioned, this is told from the point of view of Enlil. Enki, though brilliant, was a spoiled child, jealous of his brother Enlil, and wanting a kingdom of his own. When Nibiru was faced with the crisis of loss of atmosphere, and the Anunnaki decided to mine gold here on Earth to reseed their atmosphere, Enki saw it as an opportunity to grab power. Enki fomented a worker revolt, knowing that he could use Nibiru's emergency to force the council to accept anything. Enki wanted a world filled with slaves that he could rule over, which is something neither the council nor the Anunnaki would have ever allowed. But Enki was shrewd. Enki convinced the council that Nibiru would die if the gold-seeded atmospheric shield was delayed. He convinced them that the workers would not return to duty. They were following his orders, since he was in charge of the mining operation. He convinced the council that the only solution was to create a non-sentient species out of the highest order of ape available to do the labour, but make them incapable of reproduction so they would naturally die off. And we see that Genesis chapter 6 verse 4, the Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, The same were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown.
This teaching does go on pretty far, but I think, to come to a close, let's just read the next paragraph and then,
Of
close
course,
it
yeah.
from there.
The council saw no alternative, so they reluctantly and conditionally agreed, and they allowed Enki to carry out a plan. But Enki pulled a fast one, and gave the new species the ability to breed. Now, Enki wanted a permanent stock of slaves for his planned kingdom. Enki went even further, and didn't just manipulate the ape's DNA, but he actually infused Anunnaki DNA into the mix, which would give him the slaves that he would also find attractive and acceptable to be in the company of. Enki did this both in the laboratory and also by allowing his loyal striking workers to inseminate the females he created, which is referred to in Genesis 6 as well, and this led to the birth of the Nephilim. When Lord Anu and his son Lord Enlil learned of this treachery, Enlil was sent to Earth to correct his brother's sin against the universe, which is in accordance with the very strong moral code that the Anunnaki have. Enlil, who we now know as Rael, took over on Earth and brought Enki to justice, but it was too late. Enki had created several abominable and potentially dangerous seed lines, all without an Anunnaki spirit and without Anunnaki morals and virtues. These were savage slaves that resembled the Anunnaki, but were violent beasts.
So basically, this was just to summarize some of the rest of this is the council decided that they were going to wipe out what was this abominable creation on the earth, but also Enlil petitioned to preserve some of mankind.
Well, it wasn't what we might refer to it, an active act of genocide. It was simply allowing a natural disaster to happen, which would
Like they could have prevented it, but they decided not to.
Yes, exactly. So it didn't. It was a loophole, really.
Yeah, big one.
So
a big loophole called the Nemesis system, essentially.
Yeah,
and what we know as the flood of Noah, biblically,
was directly triggered by the Nemesis system making a close approach to Earth.
How convenient.
Which I would still say is a natural disaster, but the consequences could have been avoided. But doing it this way basically allowed the Anunnaki to not feel like they had blood on their hands.
Yeah, it was gravitational and magnetic forces.
Exactly.
It was on their hands. Right.
But Enki still didn't want to see all the work that he'd put in completely destroyed. So he went behind the council's back again and gave instructions to who we know in the modern time as Noah.
Oh, Enki did this?
Yes.
Interesting.
And although there is a lot of strong evidence that there was actually more than one ark, I will just stick to the biblical and the Sumerian accounts, which in the Sumerian the name was Utnapishtim. And that version of the story seems to refer to not only living animals, but also him being given access to some Anunnaki DNA. Not DNA, given access to some Anunnaki technology to take DNA samples for some of the animals that there wouldn't be living examples of on the planet, to preserve them that way. And so when this pole shift type event happened, humanity, where it's very different today, where there's humans that live up high in the mountains and all over the earth. In that time, everyone was living, all of mankind was living at fairly low elevations. So when this massive flood swept the earth, everyone was... I misspeak. There was a point where all land was submerged, but it was sufficient enough that mankind at least was almost entirely destroyed.
And many of the animals, except those that were preserved on this ark.
And sea creatures, of course. But the most notable survivor that we read of in Scripture is Noah himself and his family. And even at that point, even Enlil himself realised a potential in mankind that he hadn't seen previously. But there's the common Christian perception that God and his Son are both unchanging, and not even their perspective ever changes. But they're still living beings with minds, and their perspectives change based on things that they learn. Now, I would also argue that there's very little, if anything, that God himself still has yet to learn. But Enlil, just like in his own way, is still not at the same level as God. He learned something when he saw Noah and his family. He saw the potential of mankind. And for lack of a better term, he fell in love with that potential and decided to do all he could to protect and nurture that and allow it to flourish.
But Enki, on the other hand, for all he had done, he did have some saving grace qualities as well. And he also received a punishment for what he had done. And it was actually written here in the teaching here. If you see that right above the point at which it says the following is told from the point of view of Enki, the paragraph above that, there were 2 lines above that. When the council learned of this, they were livid, and Enki paid the price for his treachery. But this left a growing species that was as dangerous as ever. Enki was forced to return to the earth.
After each death.
After every death, yep, each and every one of them, to guide and to teach his own creation. Moses was actually one of those incarnations where he was giving the law to his people.
And I find it interesting, just to interject, that a common symbol associated with Moses is a snake coiled around a staff. But
maybe it could have been that. Well, I mean, I'm only theorizing here, but maybe Greek Greek representation mythology is Hermes was Enki.
It's a distinct possibility given the context of the fact that Enki was basically sentenced, for lack of a better term, to living an eternity of not an eternity, but a prolonged reincarnation cycle in concert with what he'd created.
And now we know today
Richard Ruff, who is still delivering teachings from the Torah to the world in the Torah code.
And stuck on Earth with the rest of us. Sorry. It's just the truth. Well, for those of you humans out there who enjoyed this show, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you, Brother Matt, Cardinal Matt Staader, from the Ecumenical Order of Christ, for joining us on the council. We're going to try and get this show out to you multiple times in the week, but we will be streaming on schedule every Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's Los Angeles time. That's Tijuana, Mexico time. Seattle, Washington time. All those places in between. 1 p.m. every Sunday. Now, again, it was a pleasure having you with us, brother.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And
thank you for the opportunity. This is a topic I could talk on for hours, weeks, days.
We can thank God for our opportunities too, and always. I think that we should definitely have you on again in the future.
I'd love to.
Maybe we could expound on this topic or whatever you feel like discussing. We'll set it up for you.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Again, like, share, subscribe, donate. There's a PayPal link down below in the description. Click it. Give us your money. We need it. And you need the blessings from God that come with it. Promise you that. When you give, you receive. It does happen that way. Every
Seen
time.
it firsthand.
Yes. Yes, we have. We have seen it firsthand. And appreciate your time, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah. May God bless. We're gonna do this ending stream sequence. All fancy and stuff. Hope you like it. Nice animation. Bye.